Cheers, big ears. Welcome to another video. My name is Heather, and as always, I'm reading with a vengeance, and I hope you are as well. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I'm very glad you're here. If you're not new, thank you so much for coming back. Today, I am here to talk about the rest of the books that I read in April. I did a mid-month wrap-up video, and so these are the books that I have read from mid-month to the end of the month. And as promised in my mid-month video, I will start with some stats. Let's have a look-see. I had a total of 14 books read, 1 DNF, wah wah. I had read from 8 women authors and 3 authors who are people of color. The genre breakdown goes as follows. I had 1 sci-fi, 1 sci-fi/dystopia, 1 nonfiction, 2 manga, 3 contemporary fiction, 2 historical fiction, 3 thrillers, 1 mystery, and the 1 DNF was contemporary fiction. If that math doesn't add up, it's because sometimes a book, I don't know, I count it as more than 1 genre, I think. Not sure. Anyways, so I did a TBR video for the month of April, and it did not go well. I read 4 of the books that I mentioned in that video, and I think I probably talked about 12. I don't remember exactly. The one thing though that always kind of messes up my TBR is the books that I listen to, which usually takes up about half of the books per month. The books I listen to is basically just based on what's available on my Libby app and if it's on my Goodreads want to read list. I never really know or what I'm going to listen to until it's time to listen to a book. So it's as much as a surprise to me as it is to anybody else. And just to recap of what I read the first half of the month, I read All Systems Red by Martha Wells. I read The Little Book of Hygge, The Danish Way to Live Well by Mike Viking. I read volumes 2 and volumes 3 of The Way of the House Husband by Kosuke Uno. Those were the 2 manga. I read Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, The Heart's Invisible Furies, as you know, by John Boyne. I read Tangerine by Christine Mangan and The Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. All right, so let's get started with the books that I have read since the middle of the month. The first one I want to talk to you about is The Serpent King by Jeff Zentner. I listened to this. This is listed on Goodreads as a young adult, but I think it's more of a coming of age story, more contemporary fiction, and that's kind of what I counted it in my stats. I felt this was kind of a misnomer as far as how it was titled. So there's 3 main characters. There's Dill, Travis, and Lydia. They're all really good friends. They're all in their senior year of high school, and they're all heading in kind of different directions. Dill is kind of the main character, and his father and grandfather were kind of known as Serpent Kings because they were ministers in their church, the kind of ministers that use snakes in their preaching. While it touched on that a little bit in the story, I felt like it really didn't have anything to do with the main story. So I won't even go into that, but that's why it's called The Serpent King. But anyways, these 3 folks are really, really good friends. They all live in a teeny tiny rural town in Tennessee, and Lydia is on her way out. She comes from a family where her father's a doctor. Her mother, I can't remember what her mother does, but she's pretty well off. She wants for nothing. And she's super smart, and she's on her way to New York City to go to college. She has a edgy fashion blog that she has probably more than 100,000 followers on. She's got direction. As soon as she graduates from high school, she's out of here. Travis comes from a home where the father is alcoholic, mother is a codependent. The father is abusive to both Travis's mother and to Travis himself. Travis doesn't really know what he's going to do once he graduates. His main passion in life is there's a fantasy series of books that he's super into. He's on a fan fiction chat online, and he meets a girl, and they're developing a relationship. And then there's Dill, who really doesn't see himself going anywhere. His father, who was the kind of secondary Serpent King, he's in prison. His mother is super, super religious and just believes that Dill should follow in his father's footsteps as far as being a minister. Absolutely poo-poos the idea of going to school or going to college after high school, even though Dill is smart enough to do that. So Dill sees high school graduation as kind of the end of the road. He doesn't really have anywhere to go. Meanwhile, Lydia is encouraging him to take the SATs, apply to college, apply himself to life. He doesn't have to follow his father's footsteps, and Lydia is really encouraging him to do something with his life. So it's these three kids who are going through their senior year. It talks about their friendship. It talks about Dill's hidden feelings for Lydia, and then a tragedy happens, and of course I won't tell you what that is for spoiler. Kind of is the catalyst for events that happen, and it goes from there. I really enjoyed this story. Like I said, I listened to it. I think I saw it, someone, a Bookstagrammer had recommended it, and it sounded really good and really encouraged me to read it, and I'm really glad I read it. I felt like the story could have gone deeper. I felt like this was a potential, as I'm reading it, I felt like it could have been a potential 5 stars, but it just kind of stayed on the surface. I believe this was a debut novel from the author, and I will definitely read whatever else that Zentner writes, because certainly potential, but I felt like this story, he kept it kind of on the surface, and I felt kind of wanting more at the end. I gave this 3.5 stars. I still recommend it. It's such a good story. There's stuff that happens that I did not expect, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. So yeah, 3.5 stars. The next book I read was The Farm by Joanne Ramos. I read the physical book in this, but I checked it out from the library, so I've already returned it. I read this. This was selected for my personal book club that I have online. Sci-fi / dystopian, at least that's what it's supposed to be, but I felt like this could happen in real life. The Farm really is this place that is kind of has more like a spa feel to it, but it's where women go. They are paid a great deal of money to go and be surrogate mothers, and they have to stay at the farm during the entirety of their pregnancy, and I think for 3 months after. They're not allowed their phone, they're not allowed to have contact with any family or friends, and they can't leave, and they can't have visitors. They basically grow babies for rich people. I went into it thinking that there was going to be some weirdness that happens at the farm, something sinister, and really that never happened. This is more of a story about class, the differences people from different classes live and how they're treated and opportunities afforded them. I found that fascinating, but it's not what I was expecting. So this was kind of slow. Again, there was that sinister backdrop to the story, thinking that something awful is going to happen, and that just never came to fruition. It's still an interesting story. I mean, some might say that the sinister part of it is that they are basically in this prison, even though it's a spa type of atmosphere prison where they're not allowed contact with the outside world and they're not allowed visitors. They are constantly monitored as well. There's cameras everywhere. They have a bracelet that kind of monitors their movement. I don't know, that just didn't, I expected more. I gave this one 2.5 stars. The next book I read was such a lovely surprise. Okay, so the next book I read was The Confession by John Grisham. Now hear me out. So I've been reading him for years and years. I've read most of his books. Yes, most of them are formulaic. You know, someone has been done wrong by the justice system, and enter the ne'er-do-well or the morally challenged attorney come in to save the day. Now, that's not to say that I don't enjoy, I've enjoyed most of his books. I can count on 2 fingers books that I didn't really care for. I didn't really care for King of Torts, and I didn't really care for Playing for Pizza. Of course, that Playing for Pizza was kind of off the grid for John Grisham. But the rest, even the formulaic ones, I have enjoyed. And then there's that handful of his stories that are better than the bulk. Time to Kill has always been my favorite of John Grisham. The Client is above average, way above average. The Last Juror is outstanding, also above average. Really, really good writing, solid story, solid characters, you know, a little bit just more than the basic plot that John Grisham usually applies. The Confession has entered into that superior level of writing and plot and characters. The Confession. Okay, so what's it about, Heather? Let me tell you. This follows attorney Robbie Flack. He's one of those attorneys who's always standing up for the little guy who has been wronged in the justice system, who has the loudest voice shouting from the mountaintop, my client is innocent, justice for my client. Okay, put a pin in that. 10 years ago, Dante Drum, a young black man in Texas, confesses to the rape and murder of a young white girl, and he is tried and convicted and sent to death row. And put a pin in that. Present day, Pastor Keith is sitting in his office in church, and in walks this seemingly invalid guy who says, Pastor, I have done a lot of bad things in my life. I just got out of prison for some of those bad things, and I now have a brain tumor. I probably won't see the end of the year, and I want to right some wrongs. That guy, who's Dante Drum, who I just told you, who was convicted of the rape and murder of the young white woman. Dante Drum is an innocent man. He didn't have anything to do with killing that girl. It was me. I did it, and I know where the body is, and I want to confess before they put Dante to death, which is scheduled to happen like in 30 days. I feel like that description was all over the place. I apologize for that. Pastor has got his work cut out for him. First of all, he's got to figure out if this guy is for real. So he does all this research to see if everything this guy said is true. And then he's got to get somebody to believe him that he's got the real killer here. And then they've got to tell the right people in the legal system to put a hold to the execution of Dante Drum. And the race is on. And man, I could not stop listening to this. It was, I mean, I want to say a page turner, but whatever the equivalent of that is when you're listening to a book, I mean, I could not stop reading it. Regardless of what side of the argument of the death penalty that you fall on, you will enjoy this story because it talks about both sides of the argument. Stuff happens that you don't expect. The story is just crazy. On top of that, you know, whether the stories that John Grisham writes, some of them are so similar to each other, all of his characters are so vivid and colorful, and the dialogue that he writes is always just so enjoyable to listen to, and this is no exception. And, you know, I gave it 4.5 stars. I'm not sure what kept me from giving it the full 5 stars. I really don't know. I'm still thinking about that. But this was just a stellar read. I highly recommend it. It's not your run-of-the-mill John Grisham. It's not your run-of-the-mill legal thriller. It was just a lot of fun. I highly recommend this. The next book I tried to read was Asymmetry by Lisa Halliday. I tried to listen to it, and the story was not taking hold for me. It's broken down into 3 separate stories that all kind of mingle together. You follow Alice, and she is a young woman. She starts to have an affair with an older man who is a writer. I probably stopped this book at like 20%, and the only thing that was going on was just the meetings between Alice and this man, meeting to have sex, and I don't know, I didn't see it really go anywhere, so I DNF'd. The next book I read, I still have the physical copy, and that is Catch Me by Lisa Gardner. This is the 6th in the D.D. Warren detective series. And, you know, is it the best book I read all month? No, but one of the things that I just love about following a series is, you know, when you get into the book, you start reading the book, and you don't have to have those uncomfortable meetings and learning the different characters and the awkward small talk of meeting new characters. You start a book and you already know everybody, and you settle right into the plot. And so I just love following a series like that. I've been reading this series, it's been many years. I pick one up every couple of years or so. The Dee Dee Warren is the main detective, and she is following a series of murders where the victims are pedophiles and registered sex offenders. And she realizes that by the third one, there's a serial killer. It's a vigilante type thing. She believes that someone's running around town killing registered sex offenders. Then the chapters go back and forth between two dual perspectives. The other perspective follows Charlene, and Charlene comes from a troubled childhood. She believes that she is going to be murdered in a matter of weeks because her two best friends have been murdered on the same exact day, a year apart, and now it's the third year. And Charlene believes that she's next, and that there's some connection from Charlene's background, from her childhood, that leads her to believe that she's next. She goes to see Dee Dee Warren and says, "Hey, I'm about to be murdered. I've heard about you. I heard you're a good detective. I'm going to be murdered, and I want you to solve it after I'm dead." Their stories are connected in that way. Dee Dee's pursuing this serial murder vigilante killer investigation, and then Charlene, from her perspective, you're learning how she's preparing for the night that she believes she's going to be murdered, and also it goes kind of back into her past as to what led her where she is and why this is all happening to her. It was a pretty good story. The only problem I had with it, and I can't tell you the details of it because of spoilers, when you learn who the bad guy is, it seems kind of unbelievable. And I understand when we're reading books, I have no problem of suspending my belief most of the time. I mean, really, that's what we do when we're reading books. Sometimes we have to do that to really enjoy a good story. But this particular thing that happens, it kind of, I found myself saying that would never happen. So that was really the only thing that kind of bothered me about this story. But other than that, it was a good thriller as far as finding out who the bad guy was and why they were the bad guy. And Dee Dee Warren, like I said, she's a fun character. She's sassy and spicy, and I just enjoy reading about her different shenanigans in each of the books. This is only number 6, and I think there's like 11 total in the series, so I have more to look forward to. So even though I had that kind of suspension of belief problem with it, I gave it a solid 3 stars. The next book I read on my Kindle, and that is The Bread the Devil Need by Lisa Allen Agostini. I'm not going to hold it up because, shiny. So I read this one because, of course, as I've blathered on and on about, I am reading the Women's Prize for Fiction. If you watched my reaction video to the shortlist, you'll know that this one made the shortlist. And I was like halfway through it when that came out. So I was really glad I was reading that. This follows Alethea, and she's a 39-year-old woman, a Trinidadian woman. And that was one thing I kind of had a hard time with, but only for the first few pages because it is written from Alethea's perspective and in the Trinidadian dialect. So that's exactly how it's written. And at first I had a hard time, but once I got immersed in the story, it kind of flowed. I felt like in my head I had a Trinidadian accent, and it was fun. But anyways, she's a 39-year-old woman. She is in a long-term relationship, abusive relationship with Leo is her boyfriend's name. They live together, and he roughs her up on the regular. She works as a manager at a clothing boutique in town. She witnesses a woman being chased by her significant other. The woman is murdered right outside her shop. And this kind of causes Alethea to question, is this what's going to happen to me? It has 2 different timelines. The present day, where Alethea is dealing with her a-hole boyfriend. She's having an affair, kind of an escapism type affair with her boss, who treats her physically, he treats her well, but of course, he's using her for his own means. He is married and he'll never leave his wife. He cares for her in his own way, but really, he's there for the sex. So that's what's going on present day. And then the other timeline is basically Alethea's childhood. The abusive nature between her and her mother, between her and her uncle. I will give trigger warnings. There's child abuse, there's domestic abuse, there's sexual abuse in this. And really what this story is about is the cycle of abuse. Alethea was abused by her mother and by her uncle, and she grows up believing that that's all there is and that's all she deserves. And as an adult, she has friends from her past re-enter her life, a long-lost brother that re-enters her life and starts to remind Alethea that she's a good person and that she deserves more than what she has. I enjoyed this book. I enjoyed Alethea so much. Alethea was one of those characters that I just wanted to hold her hand and tell her that she deserves so much more. I'm really glad I read this one. I gave it 4 solid stars, and I'm really happy that it made the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist. And finally, the last book that I read in the month of April was We Begin at the End by Chris Whitaker. This is a mystery / contemporary fiction novel. I really enjoyed this one. I listened to this one and it was very well narrated. There's a lot going on in this book, but if for no other reason, read it for the 13-year-old girl. Her name is Duchess, and she is a firecracker. She's one of those, okay, so Duchess is 13-year-old girl. She comes from a rough childhood. She's 13 going on 32. Her mother is not the greatest. Her mother, Star, kind of grew up fast, ended up becoming an alcoholic, struggles to make ends meet, not a very responsible mom. So Duchess, as a 13-year-old, is left to basically care for her 6-year-old brother, Robin. At first, when you meet Duchess, I mean, first of all, let's face it, 13-year-old girls are evil incarnate. They're not nice. And I say that from experience. I'm a 52-year-old woman, and I still apologize for stuff that I said and did to my mother when I was a 13-year-old girl. I know the hormones and all that kind of thing, but still, they're awful, awful, awful creatures. And Duchess is no exception. She's awful. And when you first meet her, all you want to do is just throw her over your knee and spank her bottom. But then there's more behind why Duchess is the way she is. And then you end up rooting for her. And she is just so much fun to read. She has got a foul mouth, and she's got sarcasm, and can be downright rude and mean to people. There's a reason, and you find out the reason. So let me stop blathering on around about Duchess. The main character with Duchess is Walk, who is the town sheriff in this small town. He grew up there. And I believe it's a small town in California. He grew up with Star, Duchess's mother, and another character, Vincent. Vincent and Star were childhood loves. One night when they were teenagers, Vincent kills Star's sister, and it was an accident, but he's sent to prison. While he's in prison, he kills somebody else, and he ends up serving a lot longer in prison than he would have. I believe he spends like 25 years in prison. Then he finally gets out, and then another murder occurs. I won't say who, obviously, for spoilers. And so you're following Walk as he is trying to prove that Vincent did not do this second murder. Walk is struggling with, Vincent was his childhood friend and knows that he spent far too long in prison for an accident. He just wants Vincent to give himself a break for what happened. And all Vincent wants to do is he just wants to be punished for everything. So this new murder happens, and Vincent basically says, I did it, where Walker says, absolutely no way that you did it. Walker is trying to prove Vincent's innocence and tries to help with his defense with another childhood friend, Martha, who is now an attorney. Duchess is trying to find her way through life while at the same time protecting her younger brother, Robin. Because Walk and Star were childhood friends, Walk kind of looks out for Duchess and Robin. So the story goes from there, and it's just lovely. I really enjoyed this one. I gave this one 4 stars. I think the thing that kept it from being 5 stars for me is, and I'm not sure if it was because I was listening to it and I might have lost the thread a little bit. Sometimes that happens if I'm not paying close attention to some stories. There's a lot going on here, stuff that I haven't even mentioned here. There's some storylines that happen that were kind of hard to follow. There's some twists that happened that I really had to be paying attention to understand. But I think that was more me. So I definitely recommend this book. It was really solid 4 stars, potential to be 5 stars, really, really good. And I will definitely be reading more from Chris Whitaker. So those are the rest of the books that I read for April. We're on to a new month. What were your favorites for April? Did you read any of these? Are you following the Women's Prize for Fiction? What were your experiences with these books if you read them? I'd love to hear your recommendations. Please feel free to comment down below. If you're still watching at this point, please consider giving that like button a boop and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. I really enjoy doing this and I'm so glad you're here to watch. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.